Our panelists include innovators and entrepreneurs, academics with expertise on the intersection of regulation and environmental economics, and one of the 5 commissioners of the California Energy Commission. The session is chaired by Matthew Zaragoza-Watkins of the California Air Resources Board. Matt?
As John mentioned, my name is Matthew Zaragoza-Watkins. I work in the Office of Climate Change at the California Air Resources Board, primarily on the implementation of the Cap and Trade program, though today we'll be talking about opportunities for cost-effective emission reduction, perhaps, in the residential sector. Just as a reminder, the residential sector accounts for about 10% of electricity and energy consumed in California. And it seems to many of us that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, or potentially low-hanging fruit still available in the residential sector. But for whatever reason, those reductions continue to persist. And possibly that's because of a lack of information, or perhaps it's a lack of government intervention. With the federal government recently backing away from stringent standards, not necessarily on residential energy efficiency, but on environmental regulation in general, it seems like there's likely to be greater emphasis on state and local governments as well as entrepreneurs to be catalysts for change and induce investment. With that said, I guess I'll ask our panelists, what opportunities exist in this space and what are the barriers to the implementation of cost-effective reductions? And why don't we start with Heather Larson?
Okay. So there's a longer answer to this. So Larry, do you want me to answer that question specifically or start with my presentation?
Sorry, that's a theme. Go ahead and start with your presentation.
I read your presentation. It answers Matt's question completely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like to operate from here?
Yes, and. Okay, so Stop Waste is a public agency in Alameda County who's a joint powers authority of the 14 cities in the unincorporated county. And our green building program has a long history of developing resources primarily aimed at the new construction market. So some of our activities include supporting nonprofits such as Build It Green and U.S. Green Building Council to develop voluntary third-party verification systems. We also work with our member agencies to, which are the 14 cities, the unincorporated county, and 2 sanitary districts, to develop mandatory policies and ordinances. And our shift from focusing on the new construction industry to developing resources for the existing building market has coincided with a number of things that are taking place in California, including a slowdown in activity in the new construction market, initiatives such as AB 758, and acknowledgement and things such as CARB's AB 32 scoping plan of all the potential in the existing building market. So when federal stimulus funding was being released for energy upgrades to existing buildings, we initiated a project which was called the Green Packages Project, which asked all of the jurisdictions in Alameda County to contribute a core set of funding, partly local money or formula awarded block grant funding, to seed a project which was going to have a countywide marketing outreach campaign to drive consumer demand for upgrades, as well as create a core pot of money to leverage towards additional competitively awarded stimulus funding. We subsequently partnered with ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, and received State Energy Program and Better Buildings Program funding. So we have a number of initiatives, a number of diverse set of projects which fall under the general categories sort of listed under here for both multifamily and single family and commercial for that matter. I'm not going to go into all of those. I'm going to speak a little bit more specifically in my 7 minutes of airtime here about some of the things that are going on specifically for multifamily housing. So just to remind you all, multifamily really is quite unique from other market sectors. When we say multifamily, there's actually a number of subsectors. So whether we're talking about building types, if this is a high-rise tower or a subdivided Victorian or something in between, there's also different ownership types. So We're pretty much never talking about an individual homeowner. We're talking about owners or managers. That can be an individual like a landlord, a nonprofit housing entity, a public housing owner, such as a housing authority, or a large real estate owner that may have, large thousands of units in their portfolio. So these subsectors have, different ownership types and different motivations for doing upgrades. Additionally, there's different kinds of energy saving opportunities. So most notably, things having to do with central systems, common areas, and also the fact that there's often professional property management. You can get some operational savings out of training that property management to operate the building more efficiently. Additionally, we call some opportunities that may be the most cost-effective points in time to undertake upgrades, trigger events. So things like, they may have a burned out water heater and they need to replace it, or they may have a soft story and some water intrusion and so they need to do a retrofit, or they may be acquiring a new building or refinancing a building and undertaking a complete rehab. And these are those opportunities when, then they're just paying for the incremental cost of an energy upgrade instead of the full cost. And we really think that it's pretty critical to leverage those opportunities to get energy efficiency in. We rarely see, except for in some cases where you're really subsidizing the entire measure, we rarely see entities undertaking upgrades outside of those types of activities, partly because it's hard to displace residents, et cetera. So additionally, financing is really key to multifamily housing. I could spend 10 minutes just on this slide, but one thing that I'll point out is that a lot of the financing focus has been on as if we're all going to go in and do this all at once. And, we do find that another opportunity is over time. We see these upgrades made to buildings. They do have operational capital maintenance reserves. And so we're looking at ways to kind of get in and affect the way that they spend that money over time. And, a big driver, I'm sure Nehemiah talked about this earlier, is the leadership that the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Committee has shown to, include sustainable scoring criteria in their regulations. And a number of the other low-income housing programs are now including criteria for energy efficiency. We right now are working on a tool that's called the Financing Navigational Tool, for lack of a better term, and that is partly due to the fact that there are actually approximately 50 utility programs statewide that touch multifamily housing. So you have commercial programs that do common area installations, you have multifamily specific programs, you have residential HVAC programs. So multifamily developers right now tend to get overwhelmed with the number of programs that they're supposed to piece together to undertake rehabs. And then specifically under the State Energy Program and the Better Buildings Program, which have all been rebranded as part of Energy Upgrade California, there are a number of multifamily specific whole building upgrade pilots. So in the ABAG region, Sacramento's Municipal Utility District has a, multifamily whole building pilot going on right now. They're offering some very significant $3,000 unit incentives. San Diego has a pilot where they're doing a lot of the outreach. San Diego Gas and Electric is intended to provide the whole building incentives, and they're doing a lot of work to improve HERS 2 for multifamily. LA has a whole building pilot where they're adding kickers for green labeling and certification. And San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing is partnered with Enterprise and Low-Income Investment Fund to do a loan product where there's a payback based on the energy savings. So there's a number of programs out there, and like I said, it's really pretty key for multifamily developers to be able to leverage funding to undertake these retrofits. So there's been some effort to try and achieve some consistency amongst programs in terms of technical protocols and just the various kind of administrative protocols that projects have to take in order to enable property owners to combine those sources of funding. So EPA had convened something called the Home Energy Retrofit Coordinating Committee. Stop Waste is chairing a subcommittee for multifamily buildings that pull together various stakeholders. The participants are local, state, and federal government, utilities, and consultants and industry professionals who are working on multifamily programs. We had, in addition to the core committee, have task groups who've been addressing items of priority to the group or things that are directly related with specific deliverables. So I won't read through all of them, but one that I think is of particular interest was the Audit Protocols Task Group. So the audit protocols, we started with Berkeley for their Me Too program, had a multifamily audit protocol. San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Enterprise had an audit protocol, and LIF, and we had compared those and then brought out somebody who runs NYSERDA's multifamily programs to talk about some of the BPI multifamily standards, and brought the HERS providers in the room. So we all worked together to get an audit protocol that incorporates HERS 2, incorporates BPI, works for multifamily programs based on some of what the regional groups were already doing. And now it's kind of a template that different programs can utilize and adopt. So as of right now, all the SEP and BBP funded programs are utilizing that. And as well as Greenpoint rated program is utilizing that and training to that. And the state's the CSD's WAP program has released a new multifamily audit protocol that incorporates that. And so it's kind of working towards getting consistency so there's not so many different types of technical protocols amongst these different programs. So just quickly, the HERC put out, after a year-long process, public meetings, et cetera, recommendations in 6 specific areas. And I have a copy of the report here. I have a few copies here if anybody wants one, or I can email it out digitally. And where some of the specific resources that are coming out of the specific state energy program and better building programs deliverables, you can read them up there on the slide. And specifically something that Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Alameda County are doing is a green labeling pilot. So we're actually offsetting the cost of green certification. And this is something that was based on a project that was originally jointly funded by Energy Foundation and Stop Waste to develop this rating system specifically for multifamily upgrades. And then there's some specific trainings both for raters and auditors as well as multifamily building operators that are going to be delivered throughout the next year and a half. There's improvements to the HERS 2 software for both low-rise and high-rise multifamily, and then the financing navigation tool, which I mentioned, and a energy tracking system. And this is something that I think is probably pretty interesting for people who are interested on the financing side. It's intended to provide a common data platform and set of information for various programs and enable property owners and program administrators and auditors to start tracking upgrades over time. So that's it.
Thank you, Heather. Cisco, would you like to go next?
Be happy to, thanks. My name is Cisco Devries. I'm the president of Renewable Funding, which is a... Oh, thanks. It's like, my name's pretty funny there, Larry, huh? It's kind of rude. We've known each other for a lot of years. You don't need to go there today. I work, my company is called Renewable Funding, and we do a lot of programs and financing work in the energy efficiency, particularly energy efficiency space. And we're based in Oakland. We have some other offices, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our work, but we've, in a sort of brief few minutes here, but I think really what our company is dedicated to is helping to solve the problem that we're here talking about, which is how do you actually break open what everyone seems to say is the low-hanging fruit, but it sometimes seems like the low-hanging fruit that nobody can actually reach. I also want to say this, I couldn't stop without saying for a moment, this is a glorious building, is something that I probably gave 2 or 3 years of my life expectancy to when I was chief of staff to Mayor Bates here in Berkeley, and every time I come back, I walk with awe. It is a beautiful hub for these kinds of conversations, and to be here having this conversation actually is really reassuring that you don't just spin your wheels forever and nothing ever happens, which I know, given the context of the conversation we've been having here today, is something you might be feeling. Also, my friends Timothy and Neil and others from the city are here, and Gordon Wozniak, and so it's kind of like coming home. So let me just start off and say a few numbers. We all stuff you know, but just to sort of, I'm going to set up something I think is really important, which is that we know 35% or so of the carbon emissions in this country come from buildings. And if you are a policymaker, particularly one as I was, and many of you here are from local governments, that is something that you can see and touch and feel and have impact on. And there's not, sometimes you look at the broader issues, if you want to look at transportation systems and other things that may be a little bit out of your reach. Buildings are a big one, and it is not lost on any of us that we've known that there's energy efficiency savings in buildings for 30 plus years. Many of you have been working on it for 30 plus years, and that progress has been made, but it seems like it is always further that we can't quite get our hands around exactly how to do it or how to do it at the scale we need to. Another number is 21%. 21% of the U.S. construction industry is unemployed, and that number is higher here in California. It's an epidemic. I mean, it is serious, and it's not getting better anytime soon. KB Holmes was just here talking about it, but this is a real problem. We have a lot of people who know how to work on stuff in buildings who aren't working right now, and we have 35% of our carbon emissions coming from buildings, which is a looming global catastrophe. So you have two big issues that kind of overhang this, and then let me add another one. The amount of money we could save on energy efficiency, even accounting for the cost, the money that goes into it at a macro scale, is large. McKinsey says $500 billion plus over the next 10 years or so. Whether we believe that number exactly or not is another question, but we also know that last year in the US, there were about $40 billion of energy-related projects done on people's homes, existing homes. $40 billion. We all talk about the solar market as this thing we should go towards, and there's many reasons we want to look to the solar market here, but the solar market was $1.8 billion. The energy project market is enormous. It dwarfs these other things, but most of the decisions made around that aren't related to energy. Your heating system broke in the middle of the winter, and you are going to get it fixed that day, come hell or high water. You called, and the guy or the gal installed a new one. You got a new roof because it was time for a new roof. You got new windows because your old windows were either drafty or you couldn't, like in my house, couldn't open them. And so eventually you make an improvement. But all of those are energy-related projects, and they're an enormous market. And the challenge of our conversation here is not to say that we have to get a tiny market to grow. That's only looking at it from one perspective. It is to understand that it is an enormous market that already exists that could be much bigger and do much more. And it could do it much faster. We also talk about the fact that, again, just some quick numbers, energy efficiency accounts, not every home is a good home for energy efficiency. A lot of homes aren't going to save a lot of money. But in solar, only about 22% of homes or single-family homes in this country are even eligible for solar, let alone would make economic sense. So we don't have to crack the entire nut all at once. We don't have to look at every single home across the whole country. We have to sort of understand we have a giant market and opportunity to get some do some real damage there. Last thing is people can save money, and we ran some numbers looking at some energy savings on high tiers in like a Fresno or so, but in PG&E territory. And you can, for a reasonably sized home, quite reasonably save $50 a month on your energy bills, even after you incorporate in financing for an energy upgrade and maybe even a small solar system. The money can be saved. It's not everybody. My home probably couldn't do that. Many of your homes couldn't do it because we have natural air conditioning. But if you live where it's hot or really cold, you can. And if we did 1% of single-family homes in this state, we'd have 72,000 energy upgrades we could do. And if we could do 1% this year, that would be a huge, huge number. So we've got a real opportunity to do some big stuff. We have people who could save money. We have CO2 that could be saved. We have the opportunity to put unemployed folks who are in this industry to work. And it's not happening at the scale we want it to happen. People are not making those energy upgrade decisions, at least not for that reason. And if I were to look at that for anything, you have to say it's a market failure. There's no other way to look at it, in my opinion. The remedy to this is complicated. And we've been trying lots of things and heard a great conversation earlier this morning. But ultimately, solving the market failure involves, we sort of loosely say it's got to be that energy retrofits have to be simple, safe, and free. And that really means what I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to talk about for a couple of minutes is what simple, safe, and free means. But a stable system that makes it simple, safe, and free, that people can make a choice. They know what they're choosing. It's easy. They don't have to worry that it's going to get screwed up. The people that are going to come to their house aren't going to rip them off. that it can be paid for out of the savings they get or something close to it, or that they've made a choice to do further than that for comfort or other reasons. But if you make it simple, safe, or free, then you've gone a huge step in the right direction of solving the problem. And then you have to solve the market issue, which I would say is in two parts. One is get early adopters, the Prius folks, to do the really cool energy retrofit. That's a small part of the market, but you got to start there. And then to capture people who are making a decision anyway, because you've already paid for that decision. Trying to get somebody who doesn't care about this to make a decision to an energy retrofit costs a lot of money. Getting somebody who's already getting an HVAC installed in their home that day to do a better HVAC and some air sealing and other things while they're there is practically free if you can grab that moment. So those are the two sort of market channels. Once you've dealt with simple, safe, and free, I think you have a great opportunity to tackle your early innovators, get this thing moving on the big retrofits, and move on. So very quickly, just a couple of fun things to look at here. This is on the simple front. I plugged in my home to a couple of websites and came up with a couple of energy recommendations. This is one, Energy Savvy. It's actually a great company. I don't mean to poke fun here. But it comes down to the bottom left, which you can't probably see, says your customized action plan. And each one is an individual thing, like get insulation. And then I can click a thing to get bids. And each one is an individual item for all things that, if you look at it, I don't really care about, right? Insulation, well, that's fun. I want to get bids for that. It doesn't matter how great the website looks. It's not a lot of fun. So then I plugged it into Wattbot. This is my same house, and this is the recommendations I got here. A 5 kilowatt solar system and a dishwasher. I have no idea where that came from, but that was the same information plugged into a different site. It's trying to make it simple, but it's not really making it simple. One, because it's complicated what I do with this, and second, because I have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, why would I get a 5 kilowatt solar system? I could power 3 houses on my block with that. So what we tried to do, and this is part of the work with the state of California and Energy Upgrade California, and Meg has done some great work doing the research to help figure this out, is simplify that conversation into something people can deal with. You can get a basic upgrade or an advanced upgrade. Everyone likes upgrades. We'll talk about upgrades in a minute. I think that's a great term. The idea is a lot's underneath that. You have to hide the complexity. You have to hide your crazy, as I say sometimes, because behind all of that is a bunch of stuff happening in your house. And you have to make for a person who's making a decision to do this, you have to make it seem like this is fairly straightforward. I don't need to worry about 17 different contractors doing 16 different things. But I'm going to get an upgrade. And this is then tied to a rebate program, which is wrapped on that with the language and with the terms. And I think that helps to simplify it. So this is a way in which Energy Upgrade California, through the California Energy Commission and PUC, is working to do that. And some of the folks that work on this with us are here. And you've got a lot to say about this exact terminology. I read through some. Did you sit through the focus groups? Yeah, okay, they're painful. So you learn that people are primed on energy but don't really understand any of this at all. You have to make it simple. You have to make it safe. Trust is in really short supply. And let me just say one thing that came out, and I use this is simplifying a little bit. People do not trust government programs right now. They do not want the government in their home, per se, unless they have to. And they don't trust contractors at all. Right? This is scary, right? They don't know who to call. But they really seem to like government lists of contractors. Ta-da! So what you get out of this then is an opportunity to say to people, look, you can trust these folks. I hope you can, because they're on the website now. You can go to it right now. This is our firm does the technology for this. Mig here does a lot of the marketing and design work, and CEC oversees the whole thing and writes checks. So thank you very much. But the opportunity here is to try and understand what people are telling us and to give it to them in a way that is simple. And I think that is extremely important. And then you see that this starts to then flow through to the contractors who say, great, this label, because it's the state label of authority, has value. You can get the rebates. You can trust me. Check out this site. So it's a way of trying to create simplicity and safety in a transaction, which inherently is neither of those things. And I think we have spent a lot of time spinning our wheels in history trying to learn that over and over again. The last thing I wanted to talk about here quickly is the cost. There are giant upfront costs to this. Whether it's $3,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, it's actually a big deal. Most homeowners can't afford anything over a couple $1,000s. And it's a huge barrier. It's a huge barrier to folks. The access to capital is one of the big market failures here. And the example that I give, which several of you have heard before, is about my iPhone. So my wife and I both have phones. Hers is not an iPhone for reasons that escape me, but it's about $120 a month. And guess what? Over 20 years, I'll spend $30,000, no inflation, $30,000 on my cell phone minutes. And I love my iPhone, but if you asked me to write a check for $30,000, I'd balk. And even if you said it's half price, how about a check for $14,000? I'd probably say no. But the problem is that turns out to be exactly what my utility bill is. And I am just as likely to write a $14,000 check to pay for my energy bill up front as I am to pay for my cell phone minutes up front, because we're not trained to do that, and I don't have the money. So until you solve that fundamental problem and you make paying for it as you go, just like you pay your utility bill and cell phone minutes as you go, you can't break this barrier. This is a threshold issue. These are all threshold issues, but this is a fundamental one. And that's what PACE was designed to do. Property Sets Clean Energy. I won't bore you with the saga. Call your congressperson, ask them to support HR 2599 right away. But besides that, it was an idea of putting the bill on your property tax, allowing you to pay for it over time. Berkeley piloted and invented this. It's something to be very proud of, and hopefully we'll have a chance to change the world with this model. But other things can work. It's a lot that we have learned how to do that. There's a lot of other ways to approach this. It helps secure capital. It helps change the psychology around paying for it as you go, and it ties it to the property if you move. So there's a lot of advantages there. But whether it's PACE or something else, you got to solve that financing issue, or you're dead on arrival, or you have to pay for it for people for free, and that's not going to go anywhere either. Well, we put it all together in San Francisco. We ran the program for all of a month before the FHFA shut down PACE. I just want to say we put tailored marketing with very focused onto demographics and folks that we thought would really go for this, the early innovators, your Prius folks. We targeted them. We gave them mail. They got calls. We did town hall meetings with Mayor Newsom. We tried web banner ads, which did not work, by the way, if you wanted to know about that. But we did try things that did. And in the first month, 9,000 people essentially knocked on the door of the program, and 130 applied. And for a program that requires an energy audit to apply, that's a pretty significant thing for us. And so it was a way of trying to put it all together to get those early adopters. And I think someday, hopefully, we'll have a chance to see what happens when the program gets to run. That's it. I would just end and say what I'm trying to say is the government has a reason to be in here because the market's failing to deliver something that should be Pareto optimal, that we should all be better off, have more money, more comfortable homes, the environment would be better, but we're not taking that thing, and we're not taking that opportunity. So there's an opportunity for the government to proactively step in to try and deal with information asymmetry, to deal with the failure of financing, to deal with other issues in this space that solve some of those problems. It's not a get out of jail free card. This is still hard. There's no jumping ahead. You have to build the market, start with your innovators, find people making decisions. All that stuff you have to do. But ultimately, you still have the opportunity for the government to play a really creative, powerful role in making that happen, and then hopefully being able to step back out of the way and let the market roll. There's, of course, the other opportunity, which is to totally screw it up, but hopefully we won't do that. So thank you very much.
Next, we'll have Carla Peterman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cisco will do our best not to screw it up. And I do agree that the government does have a role. First, I'd just like to thank Larry from KB Homes for mentioning their positive relationship with the Energy Commission, and particularly the New Solar Homes partnership. Some of you may not be aware that the legislation, the public goods charge that funds the New Solar Homes Partnership, as well as the IOU, some of the IOU utility energy efficiency programs, public interest energy research in the state, and some of the state's distributed generation programs will sunset this year if the two bills to reauthorize it are not passed by end of day tomorrow. And so please send all your positive thoughts to your regulators, your legislators, as not only for tomorrow, but for the next few months for a good cleanup language, because the loss of this would be detrimental to a lot of the initiatives that we're speaking about today. So as mentioned in the introduction, I'm with the California Energy Commission. We're one of the state agencies that does a number of the state's energy planning and policy activities. We site power plants, we set building standards, appliance standards. We run some of the state's distributed energy renewable programs. And we also manage the state's public interest energy research program, amongst others. And also transportation. That's my committee, so I shouldn't forget about that. So I just want to go into a bit more what the government is doing regarding energy efficiency in housing, and explain in more detail some of the programs that were discussed by Heather and Cisco, and perhaps draw attention to some of the successes and also some of the challenges and opportunities going forward. So clearly energy efficiency is important in the state's policy historically and going forward. Since the 1970s, California has actively pursued energy efficiency savings, which has resulted in a per capita constant energy consumption. And you see this new administration is clearly interested in energy efficiency. It ties into reaching our climate change goals. Energy efficiency is still the most least expensive way to reduce emissions. It ties into a goal of zero net energy homes by 2020. Also, this administration, understandably with the economy, is very interested in jobs. And this is a space where you can see job growth. So the Energy Commission has been involved in the Public Utilities Commission as well, and other state agencies in energy efficiency in the housing market for years. So I'll just start and focus for a minute on the new homes market, and then I'll use the majority of my comments to talk about the existing housing stock, because that's truly where I think there's a lot of opportunity still. The statistic I heard was that 75% of our housing was created before 1978. So which means it's not under our existing efficiency building and appliance standards. So Title 24 are the building standards for the state, and those are updated every 3 years. The next set of building efficiency standards will come out in 2013. The target is to be 15 to 25% more efficient than current. The energy efficiency building standards we have are in 2 tiers. The first tier are mandatory. The second are reach goals. And you can get a sense of where the next set of energy efficiency standards are going based on what the reach goals are. The only types of energy efficiency that are mandated in the new buildings are those measures that are cost effective. However, cost effectiveness is considered from a societal perspective versus from a private perspective. In 2013, for the first time, that cost effectiveness calculation will include non-energy greenhouse gas cost and savings. One thing I found very interesting about the building efficiency standards as well is that they allow cities to set higher standards. And so we've seen so far 39 cities have set energy efficiency standards higher than the state. And on average, these standards are result in 15% more savings than the state standards. We're going to be talking a lot about buildings, but one area in which you really do see an impact in terms of housing energy use is in the appliances. And that's why I'm very proud of the appliance standards the Commission has worked on. Those appliance standards are under Title 20, and we have standards for a host of household products, including dishwashers and TV standards, which was a hard-fought battle in 2009, but the TV companies have been able to meet targets earlier than expected. On the horizon for appliance standards, currently we're working on battery charger standards. So that's anything that you plug into your wall to try to get at some of those vampire load concerns. We just held a workshop last week discussing where appliance standards can be going forward. And there was discussion about standards related to computers, servers, commercial dishwashers, so a host of other products. So we have a pretty good handle on new buildings and new appliances, and we have a mechanism for addressing energy consumption there. But as been noted, most of the potential exists in the existing stock. So I'll now turn to what we're doing in the retrofit market. So the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission have identified some of the key barriers to energy efficiency in the retrofit housing market. And I would say there's basically key 4 barriers. They've been noted by the other panelists. First, you have upfront cost and financing. Second, you have consumer education and uptake. Third, I would say a trained and reliable workforce. And then 4 is program coordination. What's exciting, and the takeaway I'll give you, is that the state has actually identified these barriers and has programs in place to start addressing them. Time will tell how successful we are, but we're starting to build that infrastructure. So the main piece of legislation I want to talk to you about, because it really is groundbreaking, is AB 758. And it's been mentioned a few times. This was a bill from Nancy Skinner in 2009. And AB 758 mandated the commission to develop a comprehensive energy efficiency program for retrofits for commercial and residential buildings. And to address some of these key barriers, some of the goals and requirements of 758 do include public outreach, energy assessments, required improvements at specific times of the building life, home ratings. One key takeaway you can see from looking at the legislation is this desire to get homeowners more information about their home so they can make smarter energy choices. However, so I'll say 758 is a couple phases. We're in the first phase right now, which is about building the infrastructure. We're in the process of starting to do a building needs assessment. The focus has been more on whole house. This is more of a recent, the last couple years versus individual appliances or different items. And so really, where is the need? And that's going to determine what the need is and the opportunity to do some type of comparable rating system across buildings. However, 758 is the most recent legislation, but the state has actually been working on addressing these barriers over the last couple of years in other programs. The Public Utilities Commission in 2008 came out with an energy efficiency strategic plan, which laid out some of the challenges as well as provided recommendations. July, I believe it was, the PUC also came out with a study looking at energy efficiency financing gaps. As been pointed out time and time again, financing is a key challenge because even though we have rebate programs, customers still need to pay for half or 75% of the total cost of their system. And then a program that we're particularly proud of and has been mentioned a few times and couldn't have happened without the involvement of Cisco and other partners is the Energy Upgrade Program. This program really tries to get at those four barriers. So first, it gets at the upfront costs and financing, as noted, because it provides a one-stop shop website where you can find access to the rebates that are available. It also provides information on the financing tools that are available. It has a massive marketing campaign. I wasn't around when the program first started, but maybe Meg, you can let me know. Me and my staff have always thought that you should have gotten Beyonce to come and do like a theme song for it. If Comcast hadn't gotten it first, so it's always let me upgrade. It's always kind of going on in my head. But that is truly what we need. It was mentioned by Larry earlier. We do need to have real public acceptance and excitement and even this sense of patriotism and the importance of energy efficiency more embedded into the fabric of what we're doing. So what made Energy Upgrade possible was ARA funding. It was an opportunity to spend some time thinking about how do we really access consumers? What can we do in the energy efficiency space beyond light bulbs? And I'll just highlight here also one of the challenges. I think this is an experiment. This is a type of comprehensive, transformative, behavior-changing work we think we need, yet it's hard to measure that impact as immediately as directly. And that continues, I think, to be a challenge for government agencies as they're trying to roll out programs about what they can get approval for, what voters will be okay with around the next election term, and what do we actually feel we need in the space. Energy Upgrade has also stimulated the workforce market. There's a requirement to participate in Energy Upgrade that you have a BPI training, trained analysts. This resulted in the number of BPI trained analysts increasing from approximately 100 before the program started to over 1,450 afterwards. As Heather noted, there are a number of home energy rating training programs and trainers, and that's a new market. So one thing that I think is exciting and challenging for an agency right now or the government in this space is that by setting the rules, we're actually helping to determine what the marketplace looks like. And we're all figuring out in real time. So as there have been comments about the HERS system, for example, or HERS 2, we're trying to work with stakeholders to streamline and improve the system, but you have also those businesses that are built around the existing paradigm. And so figuring out how do we provide some certainty for business while also tailoring and designing these programs to truly be effective. I think that's where we're trying to go as a state as well, is streamlining the information, making things easier to do. The PUC financing study showed that the uptake of an upgrade reduced by 50% each time you had to engage with another party. And that's the work we were doing, looking even at the website. Well, how many times do you have to click through? How many times do you have to provide information? And how much does that reduce the fact that someone purchases something in the end? So an area where you could see this being a challenge and is still evolving is whether one can get their home rated and assessed and their upgrades done by one firm. Initially, this was not the case because one could see some conflicts of interest, right? I mean, you all have been to the dentist, that happens to me, or the mechanic, and you go in there thinking you have nothing wrong, and you come out with a mouthful of something, or a car that seems to work worse than when you went in. Initially, when the commission started working on some of these issues in the late 90s and early 2000s, that was one of the first things we tried to address was making sure that the upgrades that were being done were doing well, that there's some quality assurance. And part of that is having a couple different visits to the home for both the assessment and the contracting work. However, one can imagine it's hard to schedule one visit of anything, much less two. And so we're working with stakeholders about trying to combine those functions, but you do still run into that challenge of conflicts. So it's kind of always that government challenge of transparency versus efficiency, no matter what topic or subject you're working on. One thing that AB 758 also is working on is just how do we identify the right points of contact with customers? When are good times to do upgrades? I imagine Matt's probably going to ask me a question regarding how requiring these point-of-sale upgrades could influence or affect the housing market. And so I'll wait for him perhaps to ask me. But that is a concern about, are you stifling housing purchases at this time when people aren't seem to be buying much by requiring that improvements be made at the time? I would argue that if these improvements are cost-effective, overall, there's some societal benefit and they're worth doing, but happy to explore that more. So I think that's where I'll stop for now in terms of introductory comments, and looking forward to the discussion going forward.
Thank you. Answering all my questions.
All right, my job was to fill in anything that wasn't covered, so stay seated for the next hour and a half. No, I'm joking. My name is Max Auffhammer. I'm on the faculty in Ag and Resource Economics here, and I'm also affiliated with the UC Energy Institute and a system-wide effort on energy and environmental economics. And what I want to talk about is a little bit of the academic version of this whole energy efficiency debate on buildings. I have 7 minutes. Granted, I could talk for 3 hours, but we'll keep it short. So we venture off armed with the McKinsey curve to battle the evil lack of pickup of energy efficient devices, buildings, appliances, and whatever it is. I have to disclose that I used to work for McKinsey, so I have the highest respect for this analysis. However, as with any good study, you always have to read the fine print, right? The McKinsey study is very upfront about the fact that this is essentially an aggregation of upfront potential estimates that ignores behavioral responses or anything like that. And so a lot of the market failures I'll talk about in a little while, they're just not in this particular curve. So this is a best case cost scenario. What the real number is, nobody knows. So the question that I started working on a few years ago is take one set of these bars and try, instead of upfront thinking what's the potential of these programs, building codes in my case, to see ex post what actually happened after building codes were implemented and looking at some real data and see what savings were. So what we did is we just looked across states, collected a whole bunch of data on residential building codes, collected data on energy consumption and prices and so on, and in an econometric study tried to tease out what the long-run savings of residential building codes are over the past several years, and you see there are significant savings. So in California, somewhere between 5 to 6% per household savings in electricity. In states that don't have great enforcement or where the codes aren't very stringent, the savings are much lower, 0.5% to 1%. So there's a tremendous amount of variability. But I personally have to say I was surprised that the signal out of all that noise was so clear. A much better study by somebody who's affiliated with the Energy Institute as well, Matt Cochin and Grant Jacobson. They looked at a building code in Gainesville, Florida. Really nice experimental design, looking at a before and after tightening of a building code to see on some houses built right before the building code was relevant to right after it became Sorry, I've just been teaching for 2 hours. I've been talking too much. But again, they come up with savings 5, 6, 7%, something like this. So these policies seem to have a detectable effect ex post, not just in terms of their potential. The gold standard in this literature, Catherine Wolfram, who's sitting up there, is working on with a couple of authors who at a federal level are going to look at some weatherization programs and see whether weatherization actually has a detectable impact on energy consumption in a very, very clean empirical design. So instead of boring you here with a summary of 25 different papers, what I'm trying to say is a bunch of us are trying to look ex post how effective were some of these policies and what can we learn from them. What we've learned from studying that this is incredibly difficult to do, right? A, the data aren't available. B, you've got to spend a lot of time talking to practitioners. So after a panel I was on with Nehemiah here, I spoke to one of his friends. He came to my house and did one of these building performance analyses, and I know I live in a leaky bucket, and $30,000 later, I still live in a pretty leaky bucket. But the point here is this is not an easy problem to understand. The magnitude of the problem itself, I think we have a pretty good idea of, but how to fix it, I think is very, very complicated. So one thing we should keep in mind here, there's a paper by Howard Chong, who's one of my former graduate students who's at Cornell here. It's a very nice paper looking at temperature response of buildings. Buildings who were built under when building codes in California became online versus buildings that were built before then. And what he shows is that initially you see that the temperature response goes in the direction that you want to go in, but as we go into buildings built in the 80s, 90s, and later on, these buildings consume much more energy compared to the earlier buildings. And a lot of that may have to do with, these big, nice window things we like to have at the size of our homes, or we need to have 40-foot ceilings or things like that. So I'm not an engineer, but the empirical evidence suggests here that there are other factors at work here which are working in the other direction, and just looking at the energy efficiency component alone may be ignoring something very important here. So the words of caution I like to say when I teach this to students is, if we're trying to solve something, it's important to understand what the failures are, what the market failures are, and how big they are. Right? We have a pretty good idea what the market failures are. We all can agree on that energy is too inexpensive. All right? I'm going to scrap that joke. But energy is too inexpensive. It certainly is priced wrong. It's too cheap at the times when it should be really expensive, and it's too expensive at the times when it should be really cheap. So the pricing structures are wrong. There are capital market failures, which we've talked about for a bit. There are innovation, the typical sort of R&D innovation market failures. There are information problems, the asymmetric problem. If you tell me that something's super efficient, I will not believe you because you have an incentive to overstate the energy efficiency of your product. There are the principal agent problems we've talked about. There are learning by using issues. And then on top of that, you pack all the behavioral issues that people maybe aren't perfectly forward-looking and completely rational when they purchase these things. I have a very famous colleague who will remain unnamed and is not in the room, so I can tell this, who works on these issues and had to buy a new refrigerator. And he stood in front of the refrigerators and he bought the less energy efficient one because he didn't want to spend the extra $70 that day. So what I'm saying is, there are lots and lots of market and behavioral failures at work here, and blindly trying to throw programs at this problem without really understanding what the nature of these market failures is will ultimately result in a set of, in the worst case scenario, patchwork of regulations that result in attempting to solve this overall problem in an excessively expensive way, and sometimes these regulations not being compatible, certain regulations being, then scrapped halfway through or early on, or which doesn't get us to what we would want to, is the socially optimal, welfare maximizing outcome that we all desire. So I wanted to comment on something that Carla said at the end there with AB 758. What I really like about it is that it tries to sort of carefully think about the different angles and really treating the problem more holistically than trying to, just get it at one little angle here, but really carefully taking an overall approach to solving one issue here. How successful it will be, we will see, and we will carefully watch the data that come out and evaluate it a couple of years down the road, which a couple of years down the road in policy circles is infinity. For an academic, this is pretty soon. So we're looking forward to this. But I just, again, want to stress, thinking about the worlds in a potential savings way versus a realistically experienced savings way. These are two completely different things. And realized savings is what we're after with the policy, not trying to chase imaginary potential savings that we're never ever going to achieve. So I will stop here. I stuck to my 7 minutes, I just want to point out, and I will turn it over to Matthew.
Thank you, Max. Before I step in, I'm just going to hand it over to Carla for a quick rebuttal, and then.
No, but just and Cisco might have some more information on this, but just in terms of where Energy Upgrade is now, it launched in May and had a few months of we had the issues with pace and various things, and so it was kind of slow to get going. But the latest statistic I heard was that there's been 3,000 plus homes that have undergone upgrades or are in the process of doing so. Does that? So, I think it's starting to get some traction, and at least it's being widely discussed.
Okay. So thank you all. That was great. I will not send out my questions in advance next time. You answered them all. But if I can just work on the fly here a little bit, there is something I noticed. On the one hand, Cisco makes the point that what we need to do is take advantage of the narrow window of opportunity where people are making investments because they have to make investments and try and get them to move marginally in the right direction. Whereas, Carla, you point out that what we're potentially trying to do is do a more sort of wholesale upgrade. The idea being if we can get people in that frame of mind, then maybe we can get them to do a variety of things all at once. Both of you agree, I think, that we need to make it as simple as possible. But Carla, you just mentioned that there have been 3,000 energy upgrades this year?
Yes. Since May.
Since May. And Cisco, you pointed out that 72,000 home improvement projects, is that right, occur every year in California?
Sorry, yeah, I just kept throwing numbers out there just in hopes that it would one would stick. If you did 1% of the single family, or I should say the owner-occupied housing units in the state, you would do 72,000. But I just want to clarify one thing, which is my sense is there's two ways to come at it, and we need to clarify between the two. And we should do both. One is...
Hold on one second.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I'll direct it to you. What's the right way to approach it?
Yeah. I think Carla and I are going to be in agreement here. I think because what my point was to say that you come at it from the top, which is to say we want these early innovators and adopters and folks you can motivate, hopefully relatively quickly, to do a holistic energy upgrade, spend some more time and money in it and get it done the way I did to my house. Because some of us are sort of dorks for that, and you might as well take advantage of it, right? But understand that is, by definition, when you start off, a fairly small percentage of the population that is susceptible to wanting to do that. The other side of it is that there are people who are making choices for unrelated reasons that you can capture and have do better things. And that you want to come at it from both angles to try and move this thing forward. It doesn't mean it's simple in either regard. I'm not trying to, but if you say, all I care about is everybody to do a holistic whole home retrofit that has all the bells and whistles it could possibly have, you will leave out the fact that a lot of people are making these choices already every year, and we could motivate a better choice if we gave them some policies, some requirements, some incentives. And Energy Upgrade California is trying to strike that balance between a couple of different approaches as well. It's not an easy thing to do, but I would say that it's trying to come at it from both angles that I think is key.
I agree. I think that portfolio of a diverse array of approaches is definitely necessary because there's few opportunities where one is well placed both financially and just logistically to do a whole house retrofit. And one of those key times is a point of sale. And that's a concern for realtors, for those who are selling, just another additional cost in terms of selling your home and in purchasing one. So I think what Energy Upgrade tries to do, and a lot of these programs try to do, is make people aware at that time where they're making those decisions, hey, this is a really good time for you to do this whole house work. But doing that whole house work costs more, not just because you're doing more improvements, but you have to get then your whole house assessed in total. And it also costs more for the contractors. If we're going to move towards more whole house retrofits, then the amount of materials and the project size becomes bigger. So that suddenly becomes a different cost for the provider. And so I agree. This multiple approach would be good.
Max or Heather, would you like to comment?
So I think this is always nice to try and think to get people at the right moment. But the question is, who gets you at the right moment here? So when you're doing these upgrades, just having been through this myself recently, there was nobody nudging, right? It was you go out, your contractor tells you what to do, and that is that. So again, how do you optimally try and get it at folks in a meaningful way here is an important thing, and that's definitely something useful. I could have been nudged. So
also make the point too that in order to do a whole house retrofit, some of the traditional financing mechanisms are difficult right now. If you would like to normally do a home equity loan, but there's something like 35% of homeowners in California don't have equity in their house. So that option suddenly disappears. And so there are solutions that we're working on now that I think will be much better when the economy improves. And that's the kind of the key thing that comes up with everything we're working on clean energy. The economy really sucks. And when you're talking about what people are willing to finance or their credit scores, they just don't have what they used to have. And they don't even know where they stand vis-a-vis themselves 5 years ago. And so part of this is just uncertainty around the customer's financing from their perspective. And that's difficult for us to help out with since we don't know their finances. But you can provide tools and resources for credit enhancements, loan loss reserves, things to improve their credit situation vis-a-vis a financer.
I guess I'll comment from the perspective of the content I covered, which was on multifamily existing buildings. And I think that one of the key angles of, kind of really getting these retrofits done for multifamily existing buildings is revolves around those trigger points that I talked about, trying to figure out how to find those leverage points where there's already private or owner investment in the upgrades. And without that, I don't think that we're going to have any kind of sustainable model. So I think that's really key. And I'm going to say something a little controversial, but I think that probably the most difficult thing right now to get the big dollars, like the weatherization dollars or whatnot, to work with some of the other dollars that are going into energy upgrades is the fact that the single-family program delivery models are being carried over to the multifamily programs. So there's just kind of these assumptions that it's a lot of stake put in this one contractor who's supposed to fulfill all these roles. And, for the reasons that Carla pointed out, there's a lot of sense to that in the single family market. There's lower price points. You need to have fewer entities touching the home. But in the multifamily sector, it's much more professionalized. They're already used to having consultants, having multiple people involved. They have a higher sense of liability, higher dollars going into these projects. And they're much more sophisticated in the sense that they're professionals in the construction industry already. And so, and there's also just a lot of stake in this one entity, right? Contractors are expected to be not only install the work, they're expected to become building science analysts, do the audit, do the energy model, install the work, verify it, and make sure the customer gets their rebate. That's, that's kind of like a jack of all trades. So there's really some logic to the specialization of the different entities. And, the contractor delivery model does not work for owners who have so many other things with their juggling with their construction financing. And so it's really, I think, really part of the crux of the issue is giving the responsibility to the property owner to, have the entity be able to leverage funding, their private funding, maybe other public dollars, as well as energy dollars, into the deal and give them the responsibility to make the upgrades included with their other construction projects, and then provide a construction management model which oversees that. So I think that's really, sort of a warning for, just this assumption that all the single-family program delivery models directly translate to multifamily housing.
Thank you. That's really a very good point. So I'm just going to pivot a little bit here. Let's talk green jobs. Yeah. Do they exist? Is this an opportunity? Heather, you point out that, for existing contractors, it's likely that there are maybe too many balls to juggle. What role can government play in streamlining their ability to sort of move into this sector, and what can we do?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, from the multifamily perspective, but I think that partly the market will work that out. Right now, we're kind of throwing a lot on contractors. There are some jobs, but there's a lot of people chained in the single-family market. And I think different contractors will come up with different delivery models, or rather business models where they kind of pull together these different kinds of partnerships where they're not this one guy doing all of this. But in contrast to this general sentiment that there's been a lot of people trained in single family and not maybe enough jobs going around, what we're hearing in the multifamily sector, where there's a different delivery model for the programs that are already running and successful, where the rater's kind of the entity that pulls together the various professionals who need to do this work. So, there's different subs on the job, there's different inspectors, there's different auditors, and that rater kind of serves as that role to pull together those different things. Is that there are more jobs than there are professionals trained to do the work right now. So I think that's good for those of us who have lots of trainings we're still rolling out. We don't think in the multifamily sector that we've actually saturated the training market yet. But I think that, in the new construction industry, you see a lot of specialization. It's like you build a new construction project, you've got multiple consultants, you've got energy consultants, you have engineers, you have architects, and we haven't yet brought that sophistication over to the existing building market. So I think it's really a matter of getting the right professionals with the right skills and not putting all of our stake in, one set of professionals.
I would just say this gets to something that Commissioner Peterman said that I thought was important about the time horizon. We're operating a lot of these programs under funding that came as part of stimulus to create jobs quickly and to get the economy moving, and that those monies are going to start to go away next year, or are going to go away next year. The challenge is that the market transformation we're talking about, the job creation is there. I mean, we hired an economist, did studies around pace, and 1% of the housing units in the country were retrofit. You'd get about a quarter million jobs, a little less than a quarter million jobs. And this is the Federal Reserve guy, right? I mean, this is the models they use. I couldn't tell you whether it'll be exactly that number, but it's not an insignificant number. The challenge is that we're talking about starting and building towards something. And the time horizon for stimulus didn't accommodate that very well for reasons that make sense. But I think we're struggling politically and we're struggling economically with the reality between the goal of a market transformation around energy use and the reality of what it takes to start up a market and do something new, and the challenges that means for contractors like Matt earlier and others. So hopefully we can look back in 5 years and say we built the pieces that actually did do all of those things. But I think we all recognize that the interim period has actually been a struggle, and that the number of jobs it created are not insignificant using some of these dollars, but that the goal is actually more longer term than it was right now.
So in just a minute, I want to open it up to questions from the audience, but you invoked Pareto Optimal, and I can't help myself.
I get $10 every time I do that, so it's...
So Obviously, the first lien holder status of the energy efficiency upgrade loans displaces potentially the primary loan on the home, right? Essentially exposing it to slightly more risk. And so the advantage of, say, a Pareto optimal change would be that it doesn't disadvantage anyone. To what extent can we bring the primary loan holders into the value proposition in a way that can make PACE more palatable to them?
So this is a really good question, and one that I will struggle not to spend very much time on, because this is kind of, this is sort of the world you live in. Let me say two quick things about it, because you're absolutely right in that the government uses the power regularly to put its taxing and assessments for items ahead of the mortgage. Now, what's due is not the entire amount, right? $27,000, $15,000. It's just the taxes due that year. So you're not trumping the mortgage by much. And in theory, the way that it works in government is you have two things working for you in these programs, in any assessment district, and PACE is just one of the millions of times this has been used, or thousands of times it's been used, is that you have a public purpose driving the goal, which is there's something powerful we need to do here, and that can be putting in a sewer system to clean up things. It can be fixing stormwater. It can be schools. There's a whole variety of reasons we do it. And what the state of California said when the legislature passed it and Governor Schwarzenegger signed it was, we're adding to the list of things that have a real public purpose that we believe take precedence here, the idea that people need to do energy improvements to their homes and put maybe solar on their homes. And then the programs that developed generally had cost effectiveness and other standards associated with them, so that you, number one, were trumping it for public purpose, but two, for the first time in history, in the use of these types of governmental power, you had cash flow actually making up that difference back to the homeowner. So in concept, the lien holder, the mortgage holder, is actually, the home is better off. It's worth more, it's been improved, there's cash flow, the energy costs have come down. The challenge is, how do you know how much it came down? How do you know what would have happened otherwise? All the rest of it is complicated, and I will go to one thing that needs to get fixed. The mortgage underwriting system has a flawed piece of math, and that's, to put it bluntly, screwing all of us, which is that when they do underwriting on a home, they look at principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, PITI. That's the cost of your ownership when they figure out what you can afford in a mortgage. Energy and utilities are not on there, and those are more expensive by double on average than insurance. And so a home that has zero energy costs next to a home that has $1,000 a month energy costs are going to be underwritten for exactly the same loan for exactly the same borrower, even though their ability to pay is dramatically different. And so the nicer folks that talk to you reasonably, quietly when you're dealing with PACE from the mortgage industry and the regulators say, look, we know it's a mistake, but when we allow PACE in there, the taxes go up, the equation gets worse, we can't see the energy costs come down. So the equation looks worse, even though we know it's not. So I think there's a governmental intervention to fix a policy issue with how we underwrite mortgages, but it gets to the issue of how you then get the entire industry to align around why this then makes more sense. It's not just about PACE, it's about any financing or improvement you would do would start to matter more in a financing transaction. So that's just kind of a short way of doing it. It is a serious issue, and I appreciate you raising it. So.
Carla.
I think in addition, PACE definitely provides opportunities in this market that haven't been there before, but we also need to give a serious consideration to on-bill financing in the residential market. The PUC's energy efficiency financing plan goes more in depth into this and more eloquently than I can, but we do have commercial on-bill financing. And again, this is a way for your energy efficiency cost to be paid through your utility bill. And it's possible to think about how do you transfer that between different tenants. So I just wanted to bring that one out as well.
So with maybe 10 or 15 more minutes left, let's try and squeeze in a few questions. Nima.
This is primarily for Max, but Commissioner Peterman, I think I'd like to hear your answer on this too. Max, you were talking about kind of pushing aside the studies of all the different market barriers and just looking at the ex post results and saying, what works here. In many ways, we've done that a lot. And then the obverse is we made assumptions about what the market barriers are and how to address them. It seems to me that we need to have the same level of study about what each of the barriers are and what the what the real barrier is in that situation, and how to address it. And if an example is, well, I'll leave it at that. So the question is, do you see those other kinds of studies happening, and are they happening in your department?
I should talk to my colleagues more, but the people are working on this stuff, right? Every time energy prices go up, all of a sudden everyone starts working on energy economics issues, at least people who haven't worked on it before. So as Severin and Catherine can certainly witness, the influx of folks into energy economics and energy issues from other parts of economics, at least, has just been tremendous. So folks are studying these issues. I know on the psychology end too, people are starting to look at these issues. How do people maybe treat energy expenditures differently from other goods? But it's a very, very hard issue to study, and it's very hard to set this up in an experimental setting where you hold the rest of the world essentially constant, and you give people two different treatments or two different realities, and then tease out the difference, and then even attributing the difference to one of these particular things. It's not easy to do. So I'm not saying, we just need to study this for a couple of years and we'll have the answers to this. For most of these, I don't foresee us having good answers of the magnitude of these issues. What I'm more worried about is us, making very optimistic or pessimistic parametric assumptions about technologies, and then just taking those as truth, relying on those, and not taking into account the response of individuals to either regulation or new technologies if they use it differently, or don't behave in the way that we anticipated. So that's what I was trying to say. Carla.
I'll just say more study of the barriers always helps, but from my own research, I've noticed that your first impression of what's happening, even once you do a lot more research to get it more accurate, usually ends up being right. And so I think we know what the barriers are. Now, we don't necessarily know the full size or the relative significance, but we know what the main barriers are. Your comment made me think about some of the work that we're doing at the Commission regarding energy efficiency attribution, looking to see what amount of the energy efficiency savings we've observed comes from utility programs versus natural occurring versus standards. And we decided not to do attribution in this round of the energy efficiency and demand forecast that went out, because there was a lot of controversy and discussion about it, about all of these things are often intertwined, and how can you say that some savings is due to this program versus not. But they were also in that space where we're trying to understand that better, because you do want to know which of the specific programs you're doing work. And as Max pointed out, we do have a host of programs, and it'd be better to be able to pinpoint. But fundamentally, there's uncertainty in the evaluation. So at some point, you just have to stop and get on with it.
If I were sarcastic, which I am, I would, I look at residential buildings in the McKinsey curve, and I can't read the small print here, but I think it's minus $120 a ton. I would expect some McKinsey partners to leave McKinsey and start, retrofitting buildings against contracts of savings or something like that. I don't see any of that happening. So I'm just concerned that we're taking these numbers at face value when what we're actually going to see is a much, much smaller number. And now I'm done.
Let's say that we're focused on residential efficiency from a climate perspective. And we see nationwide that the best programs in the country are getting just over 1% market penetration a year. And if we're talking about retrofitting the existing upgrading the existing housing stock on a relevant timescale to climate, lots of experts are suggesting that we need kind of close to the range of 5% a year, let's say, of the existing, let's say, pre-1980 housing stock. What are we building towards? We have these, Energy Upgrade California, which has been this valiant effort and incredible infrastructure. But there seems to be confusion in kind of the market around what we're really building towards here. Are we trying to create political will to put regulations in place, knowing that today we're getting the early adopters for whom these barriers are relatively low. I mean, they're significant, but relatively low. And as we get deeper market penetration, the barriers only get more severe. And so are we trying to build political will by saying, yes, these energy upgrades are good, people have good experiences with them so that we can put regulations in place? Or are we trying to build a kind of public infrastructure to support some strictly market-driven affair? And I guess in the event that we're trying to build towards regulation or better monetization of the public subsidy, how does that impact program design over the next, let's say, 5 years?
I'll point out we do actually have regulation. I mean, we do have AB 758 does require the commission to do regulations by 2015. And so we are moving towards that now. To what it doesn't say how much you have to do. It just says you have to have a program. And so perhaps we're getting to the place of figuring out how much is feasible to do.
It's both, right? Because, I mean, this is something that Neil taught me early on in my time with the city of Berkeley, which is you incentivize the people to move first to kind of show the outer edge of what you can do and move in that direction. And at some point, you have regulations behind it that clean up the folks that aren't moving. And there's stuff you can do in the middle of it. I'm probably terribly paraphrasing it, but thank you. And if you look at that as context of Berkeley with its recent sort of programs to get into people's homes and do full energy retrofits, and behind there is RICO, is the resident, not the one that puts you to jail because you're a mobster, but the other RICO. That puts you in jail because you didn't do an energy retrofit. No, it just makes you do an energy retrofit when you sell your house. And I mean, it's not maybe popular to talk about that in Washington these days, but I think you got to look at both, and you got to just say, okay, let's get a couple percent going a year, and then see and then we've proved it out, and a lot of the stuff that we need to be able to show in terms of the performance has to be there. I mean, obviously. I don't think there's an easy out from this, though. You just have to sort of power through a lot of stuff and have to be willing to fail a few times, which we're obviously, Mark, we're all well aware of. And out in the country, there's some good failures for us to learn from.
Yeah, and I would just add that, especially for those of us who are in the trenches trying to get the energy upgrade California stuff out the door, we can certainly appreciate the sentiment that we may not get there quickly enough, or we're not getting these numbers quick enough. And I like to say, we're not just building the foundation for an industry in existing buildings, but we're compacting the soil before we can lay the foundation. It's really early on, and I think there's a lot of sort of sense that this is very slow moving. We're not going to get there quickly enough. But at the same time, we are at least building out that sort of multi-pronged set of infrastructure with, getting the professional capacity, getting the standards, getting the trainings, getting the voluntary programs out there. And it sort of does start to set the stage for the mandatory programs to come in and sort of raise the bar. And I know that within Alameda County, Berkeley obviously is a leader, having adopted their mandatory policies, but there's also all the local governments within Alameda County are all organizing around potential, maybe not sort of a strong RICO mandatory point of sale type of ordinance, but moving in both residential and commercial sides towards adopting and building infrastructure for mandatory policies for existing buildings.
Maybe as a moderator, this is unusual, but Mark, I'd also point out that all of this is sort of set against the backdrop of an AB 32 framework, at least in California, right? And so I think carbon prices are going to rise, and we need to be well positioned to empower people to respond to that, right? To realize that elasticity that we expect to see. And I think that also informs this.
One thing, solar is less than 1% of California's electricity, but it seems to have a lot of political will. And we've seen the cost declines come down just from scaling from even smaller than that. And so that's why I try to be optimistic when I look at the percentages.
1,000 solar installations last year, and California is by far the U.S. leader and a market leader in the world. And I think it shows that hopefully we can achieve 16,000 energy retrofits here pretty soon and call ourselves even.
Last one.
I'd be interested, before you depart, on the panel's views on any possible role for time-sensitive prices for electricity in terms of aiming the consumer in the right direction. And especially when you marry it up against the other alternative, which is volumetric pricing, and tax and spend.
Any objections to Panelists present?
No.
So thank you very much.
I wanted to especially thank Matt for circulating his questions in advance. It worked out very well. Thanks. We'll now take a 15-minute break.
Positive.
And
Uniformly.
return for our last panel of the afternoon in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.